Dear listeners, I ask you to listen to the story until the very end and be sure to write a review about what you liked and what needs to be changed to make it more interesting for you to listen to my stories.
The alarm clock from the past. I don't usually buy old things. Something about them carries a weight I don't want, a history that doesn't belong to me. But that day, the flea market had an odd pull. It was late autumn, the sky smeared with dull gray clouds, the air thick with the scent of damp leaves and rust. I wandered past tables stacked with chipped porcelain, rusting tools, and faded books, my fingers brushing over objects that once mattered to someone. Then I saw it. A small, mechanical alarm clock. Brass edges dulled by time, glass face slightly fogged, black hands frozen at 3 o'clock. It looked like something my grandfather might have owned, the kind of thing that sat on a bedside table, ticking away in the dark. You like it? The vendor was an old man with nicotine-stained fingers and a face carved from deep lines. His eyes, however, were sharp. How much? I asked. He scratched his chin, then smirked. $5. Too cheap. Too easy. But I paid him, feeling the metal cool against my palm. That night, I set the clock on my nightstand. It didn't tick, didn't move, just sat there, silent and still. I told myself I'd fix it in the morning, but something about it unsettled me. The way it faced my bed, the way its reflection in the window looked slightly off. But I was tired, and sleep came fast. It didn't last. The ringing shattered my dreams. A sharp, metallic chime, drilling into my skull. My eyes snapped open. The room was dark, my breath thick in my throat. I turned my head. The clock was ringing. My heart slammed against my ribs. The hands, frozen for decades, now pointed to 3 o'clock. The brass hammer struck the bells, over and over, though I never wound it. I snatched it up, fingers shaking. The ringing stopped the moment I touched it. The room felt different. Heavier. The air smelled strange, burnt, acrid, like charred wood and melted plastic. My stomach twisted. Then I noticed my hands were sweating. Not from fear. From heat. I dreamed of fire. I was inside a house I didn't recognize, its walls lit by orange flames, its ceiling collapsing in waves of smoke. Heat boiled my skin, the air thick with the sound of crackling wood, screaming metal. I ran, but the hallway stretched endlessly, doors melting into black voids. And then I heard it. The ringing. Louder than the fire. Louder than my heartbeat. The alarm clock, somewhere in the smoke, screaming for me to wake up. I shot up in bed, my lungs heaving. My sheets were damp with sweat, my throat raw like I'd been breathing in ash. The clock sat motionless on the nightstand, silent, its hands back at their frozen state. It was a dream. Just a dream. But the room still smelled faintly of smoke. I told myself I imagined it. I almost believed it. Until the next night. And the night after that. Each time, I woke at exactly 3 o'clock to the sound of the alarm. Each time, I dreamed of fire. And each time, the heat felt more real, the flames closer, the smoke choking. My body ached like I had truly run through that burning house. I stopped sleeping. I unplugged my smoke alarms, checked the stove, the wiring, anything that could explain it. Nothing. By the 5th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the clock, took a screwdriver, and pried open the back. Dust and rust greeted me. Gears frozen in time. But there, folded tight against the inner casing, was something else. A note. Yellowed paper, brittle at the edges. Someone had hidden it inside long ago. I unfolded it, my fingers trembling. 3 words, scrawled in jagged ink. Save yourself now. The taste of copper filled my mouth. I didn't think. I threw the clock across the room. It hit the wall, glass shattering, metal crumpling. Then my phone buzzed. A news alert. Fire engulfs apartment building, 1 dead, dozens evacuated. I clicked the link. The picture loaded. flames devouring a building. My building. I woke up gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat, the room unbearably hot as if someone had turned the heater up to an impossible degree. My heart pounded so violently it felt like my ribs would crack. The air smelled of something acrid, bitter, burning wood, maybe, or something worse. The dream had been so vivid, so real, that even now, as I blinked into the darkened room, I swore I could still see the flickering orange glow dancing along the walls. But the room was silent except for my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I swallowed hard and turned toward the clock. It sat on the nightstand, motionless, its hands frozen at 3, just like before. The glass over the face was slightly fogged, as if it had been breathing. My fingers trembled as I reached out, expecting it to feel warm, but it was cold. Ice cold. The feeling sent a shiver down my spine, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just an old clock, a useless piece of junk, and I was letting my mind play tricks on me. Still, something gnawed at the edges of my rationality. The dreams, no, not dreams, nightmares, were becoming more detailed, more oppressive. I could see the fire now, feel the blistering heat against my skin. I could hear screams, distant yet deafening, echoing in my ears long after I woke. And the worst part? I knew, deep in my gut, that these were not just random nightmares. They were memories. But not mine. Someone else's. The next day, I barely touched my coffee, my stomach twisted into anxious knots. I needed answers. Maybe it was nothing, maybe my mind was just caught in some strange loop, associating the clock with something eerie. But I had to be sure. So I did what any half-sane person would do. I pried the back of the clock open. The metal cover was rusted shut, but after some effort, I managed to pop it off with a knife. Inside, among the delicate gears and tiny, intricate parts, was something that didn't belong. A small, yellowed piece of paper, folded so many times it had creases like old skin. I hesitated before unfolding it, my hands unsteady, my breath caught in my throat. 3 words. Hastily scrawled. Faded, but unmistakable. Get out now. My stomach dropped, an icy tendril of fear winding up my spine and gripping the back of my neck like a vice. It wasn't possible. It wasn't real. This was just some stupid prank, right? Right? But as I sat there, the clock in my hands, a sharp beep from my phone shattered the silence. I turned to the screen. A news notification. My breath hitched as I read the headline. Breaking news, apartment fire on West Main Street. 1 dead, several injured. My blood ran cold. That was my street. And the address? My apartment building. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring as the words burned into my mind, searing through my skull like a hot iron pressed against flesh. My hands trembled, and the phone nearly slipped from my grip as I forced myself to focus, to read past the initial shock and make sense of what I was seeing. The fire had started on the 3rd floor, my floor. The article didn't specify which apartment, only that the blaze had erupted in the middle of the night, around 3 in the morning, the flames spreading rapidly before the fire department could get it under control. 1 person dead, others injured, their names not yet released. I felt a sickening churn in my gut as I imagined the scene, the thick smoke curling through the hallways, the suffocating heat pressing down like an invisible hand crushing ribs and lungs. It wasn't just coincidence. It couldn't be. I turned back to the clock, the rusted casing still pried open, the paper still trembling between my fingers. The words stared back at me, warning me, urging me, and suddenly, the weight of it all hit me like a freight train at full speed. Someone, whoever had owned this clock before, had tried to warn me. But how? And why? My rational mind fought against the absurdity of it, but the growing sense of dread in my chest told me that I already knew the answer. This clock wasn't just an old trinket from a flea market. It was a message, a relic from something, or someone, that had already lived through what I was just beginning to experience. The dreams, the suffocating heat, the unrelenting ringing at exactly 3 in the morning. It was as if the past itself was trying to reach me, to scream at me from the other side of time, to make me understand before it was too late. I had to get out. Now. Shoving the clock into my bag, I grabbed my jacket, barely stopping to shove my feet into my sneakers before stumbling toward the door. My pulse hammered as I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands slick with sweat, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Every instinct screamed at me to move faster, to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But just as I yanked the door open, the overhead light flickered, buzzing angrily before going out completely, plunging the hallway into darkness. My throat tightened. The air felt heavier, thick like molasses, and a slow, creeping heat began to seep through the walls. Then, from deep inside the apartment, I heard it. The faint but unmistakable sound of ticking. Slow at first, deliberate, measured, but growing louder with each passing second. A rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat pulsing through the walls, beneath the floor, inside the very air around me. I turned, my eyes searching the shadows, but there was nothing, no movement, no sign of life. Yet the sound persisted, filling every corner of the apartment, a chorus of unseen gears grinding together in eerie synchrony. I stepped back, my foot hitting something solid, and I nearly lost my balance. Looking down, I saw the clock lying on the floor, though I knew for a fact that I had shoved it deep inside my bag just moments ago. But now, impossibly, it was here, its face tilted upward, its hands spinning wildly, faster and faster, blurring together into a frenzied whirl. My breath caught in my throat. And then, it stopped. The hands froze at exactly 3. The silence that followed was deafening. And then the alarm started. Not the clock this time. The real fire alarm. The shrill, piercing wail echoed through the building, a sound I had only ever heard in drills, but now it carried a terrifying weight, a finality that made my skin prickle with cold sweat. I bolted, tearing down the hallway as the acrid stench of smoke hit my nostrils, thick and suffocating. The stairwell was already filling with it, the air a swirling, choking mass of black tendrils curling up from below. Someone was shouting in the distance, a panicked voice barely audible over the blaring sirens, the pounding of my own heart. My lungs burned as I forced myself forward, down the stairs, my fingers trailing along the railing, slick with something I didn't want to think about. By the time I stumbled outside, my chest was heaving, my vision swimming from the smoke and the adrenaline surging through my veins. Flashing red and blue lights painted the night in surreal streaks, fire trucks lined up along the curb, firefighters moving with urgent precision. And there, standing in the chaos, was my building, my home, engulfed in flames, the fire licking hungrily at the windows, consuming everything in its path. I could barely hear myself think over the roar of the inferno, but one thought pushed through the haze of disbelief. If I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't seen that message, I would have been in there. And then I saw something else. A figure. Standing on the sidewalk, just beyond the flashing lights, watching me. Dressed in clothes that looked decades out of place, a long coat hanging loosely off their frame, their face obscured by the shifting glow of the fire. I blinked, my breath hitching, and for a moment, I swore I saw something glint in their hand, a pocket watch, its chain dangling loosely, swinging in slow, deliberate movements. A firefighter grabbed my arm, shouting something about moving back, about safety, but my gaze remained locked on the figure. Because somehow, I knew. They were the one who had left the message. And they had been waiting to see if I would listen. The firefighter's grip tightened as he pulled me farther from the burning building, his voice cutting through the chaos, but I barely registered what he was saying. My ears were ringing, my lungs aching with the remnants of smoke, but all my attention was fixed on the figure standing just beyond the flashing emergency lights. They didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even seem affected by the overwhelming heat radiating from the inferno behind me. The pocket watch in their hand glinted once more, the faint movement of the chain hypnotic against the darkened street, and in that moment, it felt less like an object and more like a tether, something binding them to this exact moment, to me, to whatever force had set all of this in motion. I tried to move toward them, my legs heavy, unsteady, the weight of realization pressing down on me like a stone slab. The fire wasn't random. It wasn't some cruel twist of fate. It had been written before it even happened, predicted down to the very second. And if that was true, then what else had already been decided? My survival? My death? The unknown figure watching me from the shadows? My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I forced my body to push forward, step by step, my fingers twitching with the need to reach out, to demand answers from the only person who might understand what was happening. But just as I took another step, the figure finally moved. Not toward me, not away, but in a way that made my stomach churn, a shift so subtle yet so unnatural that it felt like watching a frame skip in a film reel, as if time itself had hiccuped and left a gap where movement should have been fluid. The crowd around me blurred, the sounds of sirens, voices, crackling flames all warping into something distant, stretched thin, as if I were on the outside of reality looking in. The figure's head tilted slightly, just enough to make it clear that they saw me, that they knew I was watching, and then, with a final flick of the pocket watch chain, they were gone. Not in the way a person walks away or disappears into a crowd. One moment they were there, solid and undeniable, and the next, the space where they had stood was empty, void of any trace they had ever existed. The air rushed back into my lungs all at once, the weight of the moment shattering as reality reasserted itself around me. The fire, the shouting, the sirens, all of it crashed over me in an overwhelming wave, and I stumbled, the edges of my vision darkening as dizziness took hold. A medic was at my side in seconds, hands on my shoulders, words coming fast and clipped, but my mind refused to process them. I could still hear the ticking. Even with the fire devouring the building, with the street alive with chaos, it was there, a steady, rhythmic pulse buried beneath it all, deep and unrelenting. It wasn't just in my ears. It was in my chest, in my head, in the very bones of the night itself. And I knew, with an icy certainty that settled deep in my gut, that this wasn't over. The fire had come and gone. I had survived. But time wasn't done with me yet. The medic's hands felt too firm on my shoulders, their voice too urgent, but I still couldn't focus on their words. My mind was elsewhere, trapped between the burning wreckage behind me and the unsettling void where the figure had stood just moments before. Everything in me screamed that I should say something, that I should demand answers, that I should tell someone, anyone, about the impossible presence, the pocket watch, the message hidden inside the damned alarm clock, but what could I even say that wouldn't sound like the delirium of someone barely escaping a fire? Instead, I let them guide me toward the ambulance, my legs moving as if through water, my breath still struggling to keep up with the rush of oxygen and adrenaline. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, another person pressed an oxygen mask to my face, and I let them, because I needed to appear grounded, normal, functional. But inside, I was unraveling. Every tick of a clock, every flicker of light from the emergency vehicles, every distant crackle of burning wood felt like a warning, like an echo of something far bigger than just a fire. I forced myself to glance back at what had once been my home, at the skeletal remains of the building, blackened beams and collapsing walls sending up thick plumes of smoke into the sky. There was no saving it now. Whatever life I had inside those walls was reduced to ashes, every belonging, every memory, every fragment of normalcy devoured by the flames. But there was something else, something beneath the grief, beneath the shock. A deep, gnawing certainty that this wasn't just an accident. The alarm clock had been ringing at exactly 3 every night. The note inside it had been an unmistakable warning. And now, the fire had come, just as my nightmares had shown me, just as the ticking presence in the darkness had suggested. There were no coincidences in this. "Sir, you need to sit down. Your oxygen levels." I tore the mask away before the paramedic could finish, shaking my head, the taste of smoke still thick in my throat. "I'm fine," I managed, though my voice was hoarse, unsteady. I need to think." The woman in front of me frowned, her gaze flicking toward the wreckage, and I could see the exhaustion in her features, the quiet skepticism behind her concern. People always looked at you like that when something beyond logic took hold, like they wanted to believe you but couldn't, like they'd seen too much of the world to entertain the idea of something truly unexplainable. And maybe I wouldn't have believed myself either, if I hadn't already lived through the past few nights. I needed to get out of here. Even as they insisted on checking my vitals, even as the fire department continued their work, even as the neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, murmuring about what had happened, I felt the weight of something unseen pressing against my spine. The fire wasn't the end of this. It was only the beginning. And I had to figure out what the hell was coming next. I woke up with my heart pounding, fragments of a nightmare still swirling in my mind, flashes of fire, suffocating smoke, distant screams echoing as if pulled from the depths of memory. The room was silent, but the air felt heavy, stagnant, as though it had absorbed something unseen, something that had just slipped away, leaving behind a sticky residue of presence. I took a deep breath and glanced at the clock. The hands were frozen at 3 o'clock. But the strangest part, the winding mechanism had stopped working. The alarm was dead. Nonsense, I told myself. It's just a mechanism, an old rusty thing that probably just broke down. But why did it feel like it was more than an object? Why did a single glance at it make my skin crawl with cold sweat? Staying in that room became unbearable. I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and looked out the window. The street was empty, the glow of the streetlights casting yellowish reflections on the wet asphalt. It had started raining. Dim droplets slid down the glass, merging into ghostly shapes that melted away into the darkness. My nightmare crept back into my thoughts. Fire. I inhaled acrid smoke. Something crunched beneath my feet. Bones? And then, a note. I spun around abruptly, my eyes locking onto the alarm clock, the same one I had left in the bedroom, now sitting right in the middle of the kitchen table. How the hell? My hands started shaking. This was too much. Without thinking, I grabbed the clock and, with all my strength, hurled it to the floor. The metal casing shattered upon impact, rusty fragments scattering in all directions, and the exposed mechanism inside looked disturbingly like a spine. A snapped coil spilled out like a broken neck. And amid the wreckage, something white. A piece of paper. I hesitated, then slowly unfolded it. Run while you still can. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear anything else. The note looked ancient, as if someone had hidden it inside the clock decades ago. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the words burned into my vision. Then, outside the window, something flared up. I rushed forward and saw, at the far end of the street, smoke rising. Fire. Towering flames were already devouring the upper floors of a building, and an icy dread settled inside me. It was my building. I bolted out the door, running into the night, oblivious to the rain, the cold, the wind lashing against my face. Nothing else existed, only the roaring blaze, the crackling collapse of my home, and the gut-wrenching realization that if I had been inside, I would now be buried beneath smoldering debris, suffocating in a fiery tomb. Slowly, I turned back. The alarm clock. That cursed, ancient alarm clock that had woken me up every night at 3, showing me glimpses of the fire, forcing me to understand. It had saved me. But who had written the note? And what would have happened if I hadn't listened?